The original Mary Poppins is vain, haughty, and very dangerous in her anger. The original Mary Poppins is a downright bad nanny whose arsenal includes gaslighting, bullying, coldness, and outright rudeness. But the most important thing is that Mary Poppins is not a person at all. When I left the theater, I was crying. This is how the author of Mary Poppins, Pamela Travers, described her impressions of the Disney film based on her book. There are plenty of reasons to hate the studio. Disney distorted the work by simplifying, replacing deep meanings with cheerful songs and silly dancing penguins. Since then, the general public imagines Mary Poppins as a sweet, caring nanny. And this image absolutely does not correspond to that cold, creepy person from the pages of a completely non-children's book, which sometimes has a glimpse of occultism. The original Mary Poppins would have chewed up her pop culture version and spat it out if she had thought it worth spending her precious time on. So, who is hiding behind the mask of the most famous nanny in the world? And why does this creature need the Banks family? Today, we'll figure it all out together. There's a whole series of books about Mary Poppins, but we'll only look at the first one. It's the most popular, and it is quite enough to create a psychological portrait of our main character. At the beginning of the 20th century, somewhere in one of the cities of England, there was the Banks family, which consisted of Mr. and Mrs. Banks, as well as their 4 children, Jane, who was about 7 years old, Michael, who was a couple of years younger than her, and babies, twins, John and Barbara. And this large family urgently needed a new nanny. While their mother had been looking for a babysitter all day, Jane and Michael sat by the window and looked curiously to see who would come to them. The east wind outside was getting stronger. Dusk was approaching, and then the children saw a woman moving towards the house with a large bag and an umbrella in her hands. She didn't walk, but rather moved because she seemed to be carried by the wind, which was guided by her umbrella as the sail. This is where you and I met Mary Poppins for the first time. Despite her rather ordinary appearance, the lady was anything but ordinary. To begin with, she did come riding in on the east wind, and when Mrs. Banks agreed to hire her, Miss Poppins went upstairs to the children's room, riding up a flight of stairs that only the children noticed. It's not only the peculiar ways of moving that alarmed us in this nanny from the very beginning. The goosebumps were caused by her blue eyes, small, meticulous, and cold, and nothing could hide from them, as it seemed to children. And from the very first appearance in the Banks house, this lady demonstrated such character traits for which nowadays she would be kicked out without pity. With employers, Mary behaved condescendingly, and when asked for recommendations, she snorted contemptuously. The Banks got the feeling that it was up to them to impress the interviewer, the nanny, for their right to be her employers and not the other way around. Seeing Jane, Michael, and even the cute twins for the first time, she coldly and meticulously gave them a thorough examination to see if they were worthy of her precious time and efforts. And although they were fine to her on the very first evening, the new nanny warned the children who had already become victims of her charming charisma that she would leave them as soon as the wind changed to the west. Already at the beginning of the work at the Banks family, it became clear that either everything would be according to her rules or not at all. Mary Poppins, in an ultimatum, made a condition about the day off she wanted every other Thursday, directly threatening to leave. Why did Miss Poppins need that day off so much? It turns out that this strict and cruel, even to children, woman went to meet a man named Bert, who not only sold matches, but also painted incredibly realistic pictures on the asphalt. With him, this lady was not only sweet and gentle, she even smiled and caressed. So nothing human was strange to her, although she was not really human. But who then? So far, we found out that the young lady clearly possesses some kind of magic. But what kind of magic is this? What is its nature? What is its origin? To understand, we have to move further along the plot. On her way to meet Bert, Mary Poppins did not miss her reflection on any surface, openly admiring herself. Because another, not the most attractive feature of the ideal nanny was frank vanity. The author writes that she liked to have the most spectacular appearance and never doubted that she always looked like that. In all the following stories, Miss Poppins did not miss any surface that reflected her most beautiful look in the world so as not to admire herself. And the further, the higher the degree of self-admiration. Mary and Bert. Why did she show sentimental emotions towards him? Because with all other human beings, including the Banks children, she usually showed only coldness, arrogance, or indifference. Maybe because Bert wasn't quite human either. And if he is a person, he's also endowed with magical abilities. Why? because for their traditional afternoon tea with donuts, they go to Bert's incredibly realistic landscape, where there's a table set for tea, a waiter, and even carousels for them. Pay attention. The author does not directly write that it was Mary's charm. It was Bert's offer, and for Mary, the trip was a surprise. Next, we meet a close relative of Mary Poppins and become even more convinced that she's anything but a person. Once Mary, Michael, and Jane went to visit her uncle named Mr. Albert Wigg. When the children began to question her about their strange surname, the nanny sternly promised to send them home if they did not shut up, and as usual, snorted disapprovingly. By the way, her constant snoring, disgruntled grimaces, and threats to children are clearly not very adequate behavior for a good nanny, and it's very noticeable throughout the book. Yes, she's capable of good, generous, and even in some way, sincere actions, but compared to her constant role as a stale breadcrumb, these cases stand out rather pleasantly. Of course, it should be taken into account that the events take place at a time when parenting methods were more authoritarian, and it was not customary to spank children. It's also possible that the educational methods of our nanny are partly the author's mockery of the way the British middle class raise their children. But Mary Poppins often goes beyond what is adequate. Babysitters should, if not love children, at least not scare them to death. But it wasn't the case with Miss Poppins. Let's mention only a couple of episodes where, according to the author, Mary Poppins in her fury seemed to have grown twice her usual size. She hovered over him in her nightgown, huge and angry, waiting for an answer. Michael cowered in terror under her wild, lightning-throwing gaze. Her face darkened and became truly terrifying. As Jane notes, their nanny, quote, never wastes time being nice. Mary Poppins is mannered, organized, and full of a sense of self-worth. She's often overly proud, disdainful, and contemptuous of those around her, except for supernatural beings and not quite ordinary relatives. When they entered Uncle Albert's living room, it was found that he was waiting for them at a set table that hung in the air, under the very ceiling. The fact is that the uncle inhaled laughing gas and immediately flew into the air from laughter. Seeing Uncle Albert laughing, Jane and Michael couldn't help but laugh, as well as rose into the air. But Mary Poppins, without even smiling, easily flew up to them under the ceiling and calmly sat down at the table next to them. Here again, we have confirmation that Mary is definitely not human. And even her strange uncle noted with sadness and envy that she doesn't need any laughing gas. She can fly wherever she wants anyway. On the way home, Michael asked Mary Poppins if her uncle flew in the air. Instead of an answer, the nanny literally lashed out at them, scolded them, and said that they had made up absolute nonsense. And the little ones only had to digest what they saw in amazement. But they already knew that it was useless to argue with the nanny. Is this normal behavior with children of 7 and 5 years? Obviously not. If the strict treatment of children can still be partly explained by the educational standards of the last century, then this is already too much. And here we will dive a little into the topic of gaslighting, which we, people of the 21st century, cannot help but notice in the behavior of Mary Poppins. Moreover, this does not happen once or twice, but is her constant line of behavior with children. Miss Poppins very often used exactly this form of manipulation and psychological control as a method of so-called education and taming of children under her care. Victims of gaslighting are deliberately and systematically forced to question what they know is truth, to doubt the adequacy of their perception of reality. This is done in order to deliberately bring the victim out of balance, to damage their self-esteem in order to gain power and control over them. So, after some incredible adventure happened to them all, or they witnessed magic, Mary Poppins' favorite maneuver was to claim that none of this happened. If she'd done it half-jokingly, it would have been half the trouble, but the nanny scolded the children. Sometimes she literally lashed out at them with rage as Jane, and especially Michael, began to ask questions and try to make sense of what they'd witnessed. Unusual behavior for an exemplary babysitter, right? In addition, gaslighters gain control over their victim by focusing on their flaws. Why not Mary Poppins? She constantly, we emphasize, constantly, only scolds children. At the same time, she does it absolutely mercilessly without restraining herself in her expressions. They don't stand like that. They don't hold their backs like that. Their manners are always pathetic. Their questions are always stupid. Their clothes are out of order. Their behavior is terrible, and so on and so on. Many times, Mary openly threatens them, shouts, calls them an exhausting burden for her and their parents, and describes how they fall short of what is considered a well-behaved child. The Banks children are frightened, often humiliated, constantly in a state of doubt and uncertainty. Here it is, a real result of the influence of Mary Poppins' educational methods. But let's return to our story. and to try and figure out who Nanny Poppins was. Another piece of the puzzle is the story of neighbor Miss Lark and her dog Andrew. Once, Andrew ran away from the landlady because she pampered him too much and pampered him like a real child, and he wanted to be free. Then an unusual nanny acted as a negotiator between them. It turns out that Miss Poppins understands the language of animals and can communicate with them. We learn a partial explanation of this from the story of John and Barbara when one day the twins in the cradles played with the sun's rays and talked with the starling who lived next door. And they also heard and understand what the wind, the sun's rays, and the trees said. The starling brought the kids to tears, revealing the cruel truth that when they got their first teeth, the twins would stop being able to do all this and forget everything. He also said something else, that there was no person in the world who would not forget with one single exception. Mary Poppins. Why? Because she's a big exception. What did he mean, an exception to humanity? Unlikely. Most likely, Mary Poppins was an exception to the world in general. Further, one day when everyone was sitting at home because Jane had an earache, it turned out that, in addition to the strange man, the new nanny had some equally strange friends. Because on that day, a dancing cow appeared under the bank's windows. From the story of Mary Poppins, the children learned that she traveled the world in search of a fallen star and that she was sent on this search by Mary's mother, to whom a cow once came for wise advice. That is, Mary Poppins' mother was a knowledgeable woman to whom strange creatures turned for advice in strange cases. What does this tell us about the nanny herself? That everything is definitely not so simple with her. Charms of levitation, the ability to fly, the ability to interact with natural phenomena, knowledge of the language of birds and animals, the ability to suggest thoughts. This is not a complete list of things that our main character is capable of. So who really is Mary Poppins? There are theories that she was a witch or a fairy, that frequent changes of intentions and moods are characteristic for fairies, especially dark ones, and they easily pass from good deeds to evil and harmful. The fact that Mary hates almost all humans and is rather cool with the rest still makes her more like a fairy or some other supernatural entity. Witches are more attached to people and interact with them more often due to the specifics of their craft. Moreover, the idea of a fairy godmother figure was quite common among children of those times, and friends of the novel's author, Pamela Travers, testified to her fascination with fairies. But further events will show that this whimsical woman is too powerful, even for a fairy. Mary, although she did not overtly harm the children and took care of them on a domestic level, as her duties required, kept her secrets securely. Delving deeper into the life and true essence of a nanny was not just bad manners, it could be life-threatening, especially if you are an inquisitive and naughty child. This became clear on the day when Michael got up on the wrong foot in the morning and took out his bad mood on everyone who happened to be on his way. During a walk in the park, thanks to the magic of Mary's amazing compass, they set off on a trip around the world. And surprisingly, Mary Poppins was known and respected everywhere and was received as an honored guest. So when the trip ended suddenly and the nanny hid the compass in her pocket, Michael was very angry. At night, he slipped out of bed, grabbed the compass from the bureau, and uttered magic words, repeating the actions of Mary Poppins. But here, as if materializing indirectly from the air, angry guardian spirits from the compass from the four corners of the world pounced on him with the intention of killing him. Fortunately for him, at the last moment, a nanny appeared and saved the boy. After Michael was on the brink of death, the nanny even showed some feelings for him, in her own style, of course. She didn't quarrel, but just silently poured him a glass of warm milk and gave him peace. The further we move through the plot, the more strange things happen. And more Miss Poppins pretends that the children are just making up things that are not there. Gaslighting is gaining momentum, and the list of strange acquaintances of Nanny Poppins does not cease to amaze. And we, piece by piece, reveal the puzzle about her. So one day, Mary Poppins, together with all the children, went to a very strange place, an abandoned sweet shop, to get gingerbread. With her owner, Mrs. Corey, the nanny was not just polite, she addressed her with some special respect. Mrs. Corey's own daughters, although they were real giants, were terrified of their mother. To Jane and Michael, this tiny woman seemed to be the oldest they had ever seen, and it was true. As it turned out later, she remembered not only how Columbus discovered America, but also how the Earth was created. As if this were not enough, in order to calm John and Barbara, who were crying, this sweet and creepy old woman tore off 2 fingers from her hand and gave them to the babies, who happily began to eat them. In place of the torn off fingers, new ones immediately grew. Mrs. Corey commented that they were really tasty, as she had tasted them too, and that the children should not worry as their fingers would grow back. And that same night, together with Mary Poppins, they set about gluing golden paper star decorations from gingerbread to the night sky, which the nanny had sneakily snuck into Michael and Jane when she thought they were sleeping. To begin with, the eating of one's own kind and the eating of oneself, so innocently described in this episode, is not uncommon among supernatural beings, such as gods, fairies, and others. For example, from ancient Greek mythology, we remember how the father of Zeus, the Titan Kronos, devoured his children. And the snake Ouroboros from Scandinavian mythology, which encircles the earth, biting its own tail. And when later in another episode the king cobra gives Mary its skin, it says that to eat and be eaten amounts to the same thing when we are, as one, moving to the same end. The book is full of such references to paganism, even too many for children. But wait, who said this is a children's book anyway? Pamela Travers claimed that she did not write for a younger audience, although she was grateful that children liked her work. In general, Pamela Travers was an extraordinary woman who was actively interested in Sufism, Theosophy, Tao, and Zen, and later became part of the inner circle of the famous mystic George Gurdjieff. She regularly practiced yoga, which was an exotic hobby for those times. It's also obvious that the dark atmosphere of the book, which sometimes even has a glimpse of occultism, is the result of her fascination with mythology and Eastern culture. So take at least Mrs. Corey's ability to regenerate. In addition to some real animals, it's also very often manifested by mythical creatures. For example, the Hydra, from the labors of Hercules, grew heads in places of the ones that were cut off, like many other dragons from various fairy tales around the world. Judging from the piety with which Miss Mary treated Madame Corey, this woman was clearly a being of much older and higher order. In addition, her children, whom she kept in fear, were giants, who, as is known from the same mythology, are often related to the gods. And who else except an ancient and apparently dark goddess could light the stars in the sky, turning them into gingerbread decorations? And so, with this ancient and powerful being, Mary Poppins was, if not equal, then clearly from the same origin. That is why we'll finally reject the theory that Poppins was just a witch. Too small a definition for an ancient goddess or entity to have anything to do with it. One evening, already after the break, Jane and Michael suddenly heard a strange, quiet voice, which strongly advised them to get dressed as soon as possible and leave the house. There was a full moon. The voice led them through the night city, through dark streets, until they reached the zoo where they were already awaited. The brother and sister learned that it was Mary Poppins' birthday that night and that it was the first full moon in many years. The children saw the nanny when they were in the terrarium. There, surrounded by hundreds of snakes, Miss Poppins sat on the throne of honor. Full of royal dignity, the male king cobra crawled up to her with incredible size, pecked and slapped her cheek several times and, as a sign of special affection, presented the woman with his golden skin. This was the lord of all their animal world, the wisest and most terrible of all. Why was Poppins here? Just imagine the young lady was a first cousin to a scary lord of beasts once removed on the mother's side. This may explain the special respect with which all the animals treated Mary, and why she understood their language. And her character, let's put it bluntly, is snake-like. Cold, prickly, her sharp, poisonous verbal outbursts, arrogance. She is of royal snake blood. And that's why her rather bloodthirsty attitude towards birds ceases to be surprising, because many snakes eat their eggs and some even feast on adults. In one of the episodes discussing the well-being of the capital's birds, she says, "Feed the birds and what have you got? Fat birds," offering to bake pies from them. It also explains her extraordinary abilities, because two assumptions can be made from this relationship. The first is that the blood of Mary Poppins flowed through the body of Nagas, hybrids of man and snake, which are common in Eastern cultures and religions. Nagas are able to influence the weather, age very slowly, and tolerate people more than they love them. But the second is even more interesting. Snakes are frequent companions of many mythological creatures, and you've almost certainly heard of one of them. The image of the goddess Kali in popular culture has long acquired a darker color than it has in the eyes of those who worship her. Although this fiery lady does often have fits of rage, wears a necklace of enemies' heads, and has a retinue of hyenas and snakes, she's also responsible for sexuality, femininity, and motherly love. In Hinduism, Kali is worshipped as the prime energy, the mother of the universe, protecting the innocent from evil. We'll not claim that Mary is directly Kali, if only because the book mentions entities that have been obviously more authoritative and powerful than our Nanny. But why not assume she's one of the incarnations of the spectacular goddess, or, for example, her enlightened priestess? Especially if you remember the author's fascination with Eastern practices. By the way, Bert can also be her priest, and this is what brings him closer to our cult character. Maybe that's why he doesn't have a stable profession. Sometimes he paints pictures, sometimes he sells matches, sometimes he plays the lyre. For him, this activity is just a way to have fun and earn some extra money, but his vocation is in the service of his goddess. Kali is one of the many incarnations of the mother goddess, an archetype found in almost every mythology. For the Egyptians, it's Isis and Bast. For the Greeks, Hestia. Not every variation is cute and kind. Some fight with their own offspring. Some show their love in a very strange, sometimes cruel way. So does Mary Poppins. She seems to truly believe that a disciplined and bullied child is a happy child. Or maybe she just doesn't know how to do it differently. Perhaps supernatural beings have a hard time showing human emotions. Another interesting common element in the myths of mother goddesses is their disappearance and reappearance. Isn't the same thing that happens to Mary at the end of the first book and the beginning of the second? Her stay with the Banks comes to an end, and Mary Poppins suddenly disappears with a gust of west wind. On this day, Michael ran to Jane with Mary Poppins' magical compass, and in a couple of words that the child uttered, we see the vivid result of this nanny's educational method and how much she intimidated them. Through tears, Michael roared that the nanny had given him this compass. And why would a child cry after receiving a wonderful gift? Because his next phrase was scary. What will happen now? Probably something absolutely terrible. She never gave me anything. Agree, a scary phrase from a 5-year-old child. Comforting Michael, Jane replied that Mary Poppins must have wanted to be kind. And at the same moment, they both felt creepy. Why? Because it would be very far from the babysitter they were used to. What do we have as a result of many months of being raised by Nanny Poppins? Very obedient, trained, and intimidated children. So they were afraid of her, but they also loved her, perhaps in the same way that victims of Stockholm Syndrome love their abuser. It's surprising how desperately they attach themselves to her. Why are these kids so enthralled by this arrogant and domineering woman who regularly made them feel like total losers? Maybe because she was both a source of delight and happy moments, and a terrifying authority that kept them in constant fear. As it turned out, the strange babysitter had good intentions when she gave Michael a compass. When Mary Poppins left the Banks riding the west wind, she also left the children a short note and a small portrait of herself with the signature, "Goodbye." She gave them hope that she would return. It was perhaps the strongest, bright emotion she had evoked in them during all this time. The children never knew how Mary Poppins really felt about them because she never showed it. But the way Mary Poppins acted at the end, even though she left without saying goodbye, leaves hope that in her heart there was still a place for warm feelings for the Banks children. And that there was still something human in her. Maybe it was the Banks family that helped her remember this side of her personality. Who knows? So who was Mary Poppins anyway? A fairy? A snake man? A spirit? Or an incarnation of a goddess? Maybe a little bit of everything, because Starling called her the great exception for a reason. It does not belong to any kind, and at the same time it's a part of each of them. An eternal being who lives long enough to be attached to mortals whose time on earth is so short. A powerful sorceress who finds it easier to light a star in the sky than to express warm feelings. There are many reasons why Mary appeared at the Banks house in the first place. Maybe she just wanted to get to know modern people better. Or maybe, as an embodiment of the Mother Goddess, she felt that the Banks needed a guardian spirit that would take them under their care until better times. Yes, this strict woman may not be the best nanny, but somehow she managed to win the hearts of the Banks and readers around the world. Obviously, this is her special magic. To win hearts, no matter how she behaves, or what she says. Each fairy tale, if you try to look at it from a slightly unusual angle, can reveal its hidden secrets, and they raise even more questions. Stay with us and subscribe to the channel to continue to understand the controversial points and mysteries of famous fairy tales and stories.